Welcome back. I'm Susan Linder, your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show. And as you know, this is our very special pocket series called Nordic Visionaries, where we are bringing some of the top leaders and luminaries from the Nordics, that's Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, to talk to us about this intersection of sustainability and innovation. And that's why I'm absolutely thrilled to have my next guest on with me today. Tove Andersen from Norway is going to be speaking with us from her company TOMRA. And we are going to be discussing this beautiful intersection, and not to mention some ideas and some advice that you might be able to take away as an innovator to bring to your business, thinking about incorporating sustainability as part and parcel of the innovation process. So just to give you a little bit of background, Tove Andersen joined TOMRA as the president and chief executive officer back in August 2021. But prior to joining TOMRA, she had a long career leading the global fertilizer company Yara International, where she eventually became the executive vice president responsible for European business activities. During her 24-year career at Yara, she held a number of senior management positions, including the EVP of production and the EVP of supply chain. She also held various management positions responsible for marketing, business development, and finance. Tove has a master's degree in physics and mathematics from the Norwegian Institute of Technology and an MBA from the BI Norwegian School of Management. She is a board member of the Beauregard and the Norwegian Opera and Ballet. Ooh, maybe we can talk about that some too. Tove is Norwegian and she lives in Oslo. Tove, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So start us off first. How did you get into this role? What was your thinking in desiring to be in this space? I mean, 24 years in the world of fertilizer is a very interesting place to start one's career.
Yeah, no, I was very happy in my position in Yara. It's always been important for me to do something that is meaningful, where I actually think I can have a positive contribution into the world. And Yara is really working on feeding the world sustainably. So that was really my driver there. And I had no plan to really change position. And then I got a call about this position in TOMRA. And it was one that I couldn't say no to. And why couldn't I say no? So TOMRA is, a leading technology company within resource optimization. So it's really a purpose-driven company. It is global, which also has always been important for me. I always worked globally and also lived in different places. It's technology. I've always loved technology. And it's really needed in the world. So I came in with a mandate on how can we accelerate growth in this company, because the world needs these solutions. So it was an opportunity I couldn't say no to.
So tell us a little bit about what TOMRA does.
Yeah, so TOMRA is a technology company within resource optimization. So what we have is solutions for collecting and sorting different materials so that they can be optimized, reused, or recycled. We are mostly known for our reverse vending machines and our solutions linked to deposit scheme, where you then collect beverage containers, bottles, and cans. That is half of our business, but the other half is then advanced sensor-based sorting solutions, where we can sort, for example, mixed waste streams, a shredded car into the plastics and the different metals, or your plastic from your household into different plastic fractions so that it can be recycled. And also sorting solutions for pack houses and food processing plants, where we are then taking away contaminants from fresh fruit and vegetables, and also then optimizing the quality of, for example, apples and oranges. So the common denominator is really about resource optimization. It's technology, it's sensor-based solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think Americans would be hard pressed to recognize a vending machine that gives you a bottle of Coca-Cola and you can actually insert your empty bottle back in, right? This is literally the circular economy as we see it functioning, right?
Exactly. And there are 10 states in the US that have a deposit scheme. So you will find our reverse vending machines, especially then on the East Coast of the US. But this is, the most efficient way to ensure collection of beverage containers, because you put a value on the bottle and the can. So it creates an incentive to return it. You get a very clean material coming in. So you can really enable closed loop recycling, which is sort of our objective at the end of the day in TOMRA. We want to create a world without waste. It means that you need to collect the material and you need to get it in a form that it can go into the same purpose as it has or had before.
So TOMRA is really founded on this idea of the intersection of innovation and sustainability, right? I mean, those are your roots, those are your bones in the company.
Yes, I think, circular economy has come on the agenda now lately, but for us, it's been on our agenda for 52 to 53 years.
Wow.
So we were founded by two brothers in Norway, and this was to find a solution then for returnable bottles in Norway. So the retailers in Norway at this point in time, and this was reusable, typical glass bottles, they were collected and they had to be, cleaned and returned. So this was a solution then to automate this. So we invented the first automated reverse vending machine in the world. And now we have approximately 86,000 of those spread out in more than 60 deposit markets.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. And to think about doing that 50 years ago is no small shakes. I'm 54. And I feel like we're just getting here now in the United States to begin to think this way, much less act this way. What do you think are some of the opportunities that exist in the Nordic region that support TOMRA, right? Even the emergence of a company like TOMRA that maybe we can learn from or that we don't see here in the United States as much. What is that opportunity that you think exists there?
Yeah, no, I'm also actually 54 years old. We're the same age. And of course, I remember very well.
But you haven't aged, Tove. That's the difference. You haven't aged. I have.
And I remember very well when I was a small kid, we were collecting beverage, bottles. And we were collecting them and putting them into the machines and getting them pocket money. So, we grew up with this as a given, a system, that these should not be thrown away because they were valuable resources. And I think that's the mindset change that needs to happen, is to look at waste in a different way. And there, I think in the Nordic, we are further than in the US. So there is more work happening on designing products, for lasting long, to make sure that things are reused and repaired. And I think it comes probably also partly from nature is something that at least many Norwegians and many Nordic people feel very close to, and it's very important, to be out in nature, hiking, skiing. So I think also this love of nature has had a significant impact, that we need to look after, the resources we have. We need to ensure that we don't have littering in our forests, in our fjords, in our mountains.
By the same
token, and then
I
think, I know if you look at the Nordics in general, I think there are some things that could be kind of beneficial to learn from. I think Norwegians in the Nordic in general is a very trust-based society, which I think also makes it easier to develop new solutions like this, because a shift from a linear economy to a circular economy requires collaboration. It requires that different parties collaborate together to create new value chain. So I think having a very kind of trust-based society, quite a small society as well, where many knows each other, it makes it easier than to have these initial collaborations, which are important to develop the solutions.
Yeah. Can you remember the last time you drove down a highway and saw somebody like flick a cigarette butt out the window, or, leave behind a piece of litter? Like, it doesn't even come to the consciousness, right?
No, in Norway, I can't remember when I saw that the last time. And it's quite interesting because we see this also in other countries when you introduce a deposit scheme, because there are many other countries that, of course, have developed or implemented a similar scheme to what you have in the Nordics for beverage containers. And the interesting thing we see is that the general litter decreases. It's not only, the litter of beverage containers that decreases, but actually the general litter decreases, because it creates this environmental awareness that, okay, waste should not be thrown, on the side of the road. It should be collected. It is a resource. It should be either then go into reverse vending machine, or it should go into your bin, because then it can be used again, or it can be burned. At least it creates energy.
Wow. When you think about some of the real success stories at TOMRA, what what comes to mind for you? Where do you see TOMRA as really having made such a massive impact?
So half our business is then linked to reverse vending machines and collection solutions. So that has been a very important element. We have grown that organically, really, from starting in Norway with this first reverse vending machine, and now is implemented in countries and actually 60 markets, because in some countries, success story. Typically, when you implement such a deposit scheme, you can then get collection rates above 90% of plastic bottles and cans. And
What
you
a
can
dream.
really enable closed loop recycling. Then if you look at our sorting solutions, there are many kind of success stories there as well. A lot of it has been previously about really recovering materials from waste, so take the plastic out of the waste, the metals out of the waste. What we see now is that there is really a drive towards really high advanced sorting to get high quality materials to be recycled. So for example, if you take a car end of life, it gets shredded. Lots of different materials in that car, but it's a lot of aluminum and a lot of plastic that they are using to build the cars. All major car manufacturers, they have targets linked to climate or CO2 reductions. And as a part of achieving that, they need to have recycled material into their cars, so recycled plastic and recycled aluminum. And the challenge has been especially on the aluminum, because you have different alloys. So if you just mix all the aluminum together, it gets downgraded. It can't be used to the high quality applications. So actually what we launched last year, which I think is the coolest technology we have, it's a new sorting machine where you can then sort aluminum that looks exactly the same. It's just a mix of many different aluminum alloys, and it can sort that at high speed into the different alloys. So that can then enable now car manufacturers to get recycled aluminum for all their applications, not only kind of the low quality aluminum. So this is how we are working. We are looking at the resources in the world. Where are we on the different resources? Where is there a gap versus how much is being recycled, and how can we close that gap? How can we use our technology to ensure that material for material, that there are collection solutions, that there are sorting solutions, so that it can be recycled?
I mean, what an undertaking. I mean, just the thought of recycling a car and every conceivable component, just the things that your hands touch, not to mention all the other pieces that go into it. And there's a lot of toxic materials inside of that too, right? So the ability to sort that and find a way to responsibly dispose of it, but also to reuse and really engage the circular economy is so critical.
Yeah. And then you need to take it material by material, and you need to really have automated solutions for it if you're going to be able to do it at large scale. So that's what we are really focusing on developing. And when you're doing this, you also need to work in partnership, because you need to start with product design sometimes. Sometimes you need to actually change how it is designed, because the way it is designed is not possible to be recycled. You might need to look at, how do you actually get it back? Collection solutions. You need to look at the sorting solutions, and then you need to look at the recycling technologies for different types of materials. So it really requires this collaborative effort among many stakeholders to make it happen.
Yeah. So what are the stories that you tell them, Tove, to get them on board? Because this is a huge shift in mindset, but also in the behavior and the activity of people on the other side. How do you get the engineers to start thinking a different way, the politicians to start thinking a different way? What are the stories that you told them to get them on board?
I think first it's important to tell them what they can achieve, to start with what is actually achievable. I meet often people that don't believe it's possible. For example, then to take a shredded car and get the different aluminum alloys out of it and really sort it based on that. We are inventing a lot of these solutions, so they're not out there in the market currently. So first we need to tell them what is possible. And then, of course, often when we tell them what is possible, they don't believe us. They say like, no way, that's not possible. And then seeing is believing. So it's so important to have, places where we can take governments, stakeholders, customers, so that they actually can see this in practice. We have, for example, customer tech centers where we have all our sorters where they can come with their own material and we can play with it and we can show physically, they can come with a mixed bag of something and we can show how our equipment is working. Often we also then will create small demo plants, could be one way to do it, or that we have some forward-leaning customers that have been early and implementing at their site and that we can use them to then showcase. So we are hosting and inviting people from all over the world into both our tech centers in Europe, but also then to key customers that also are very open and willing to share their experiences. So I think it's about first creating this awareness that it is possible and get them interested enough. And then it's really about seeing is believing. And then it's about sharing, all our expertise. We have worked in this space for 50 years. We are operating in more than 100 markets globally. So we also have seen a lot of things that are not working. We see how you should design things, how you should design a system, where do you need incentives, where don't you need incentives, so all of those things we have gathered, and we are then also creating, white papers, etc., where we then condense this information that we willingly share with everyone that wants to learn.
So important. Tell us a little bit, Tove, about where you've learned from your mistakes along the way. Like help us and my listeners maybe leapfrog some of the places where you said, wow, we really thought this was going to work, but boy, we misjudged the market, or we thought that this, we thought this was going to be, as we say in America, a home run, but all green flags, but sadly, no, because we learned so much from the mistakes, of other innovators who came before us to go, oh yeah, don't step in that hole. That's not a good one.
Of course, we've had many learnings on the way. I think sometimes we have been too early. So also, to judge the timing is important, where we have come with new solutions too early. But for example, the recycling technology isn't mature enough, or the readiness of the customers is not there. So timing is important, and then you just need to park it for a while, but then it will come and take it out later. For certain materials, it is more expensive to recycle it because, for example, virgin plastic is so cheap. So actually to pay for the collection and get it recycled, it is more expensive. So unless, and we have tried then volunteer schemes, for example, volunteer deposit schemes. But if you do it voluntarily, you will never get really the scale and you will never get the high collection rates. So we have realized that okay, then if we're going to implement a really solution for collection, you need some incentives around it when we talk about plastic bottles. And then also what we have learned, I think, coming from being a Norwegian-based company, even though only 10% of our employees are in Norway now, but our headquarters is still in Norway. Our main footprint is still in Europe. To also learn that you have to adapt the solution to local conditions. You can't, take and copy what is happening in Norway, a small country, affluent, and just assume that you can implement exactly the same solutions that we have there to, more emerging market. So that's also, to be then open that, okay, there are some principles that are similar. You need incentives, you need to have it convenient. There are principles that we can implement, but the solutions might be quite different. And also that, we have some gold star solutions that we want, to implement at the end, because we want to have closed loop recycling. We want material to continue in the same loop all the time. We want collection rates that are high. Also accepting that perhaps you can create that vision, but if you only talk about that vision, you will lose many customers and governments because it's so far away. So also then to really start first with the basic, you need to create a waste management infrastructure, get that up and running, and then have a much more stepwise approach, which means that you need to be a bit more patient, which typically is not something we are in TOMRA, but to really learn that, okay, you can't go for the gold standard straight away. You really need to implement these solutions step by step.
Yeah. It's funny because this is a process that we use in storytelling, where we're trying to get people eventually to that gold standard, right?
Yeah.
To that level of change. And oftentimes the storytelling technique that we use is something called breadcrumbing. where we help people move forward by looking backwards, and we say, look how far you've come. Look at the incremental steps that you've taken along the way in order to get to where we are right now at this beautiful junction. And then the other part of the storytelling is we say, imagine if, imagine a future where, because we really want to get the listener thinking about what is this gold standard, this one day dream that we have. And then we say, we're not there yet, but we know what's on the horizon. Let's talk about the next right step. And that language helps people say, I see the vision, I want to be part of the vision, but I come back down to earth and I say, okay, what's step number one? And then it becomes, you can show people, look how far we've come at the shifts in mindset, in budget, in resources, in time spent. And then we can step into the next day of the future, as opposed to going 5 years, 10 years down the road. So it's a helpful storytelling technique to take people backwards and say, we've come a long way and we have so much more to go. Today is the day to take the next step. And they're baby steps. Yeah.
I think that's very much in line with how we actually now are communicating with the stakeholders on these topics. And I think also it's important that this next step also needs to bring some immediate benefits. So, to incentivize people to take the next steps. You can't only have this that, okay, you'll have the benefits when you have done everything, but it needs to have a tangible benefit for our customers also doing the next step.
Right. And our dopamine receptors in their brain.
And that can be everything from, of course, pure financials, but also, that it could be contributing to their carbon footprint agenda. It could be contributing for, they're building the brands and so forth.
Yeah. It's so much change going on in the world today, so much shifts that's happening in, perceptions around the need for investment in climate resources and the ideas around what is a priority. How do you think, in working with different governments to get them on board with these incentive programs and so forth, what is the story that we need to tell our elected officials to participate, to show us as citizens that we're interested in these programs and it matters to us as listeners and as implementers? What is the story that we need to be telling our government officials about why this is so important?
I think towards the politicians, it's a lot about that people actually want this and they appreciate it. And that's also the experience we have. For example, if you take Marcus, where you have introduced the deposit return schemes and you do surveys after a couple of years, people love it. They, first of all, they see that there is reduced litter, but also they really feel that they're contributing. They are doing something good for the planet by ensuring that this material doesn't end on a landfill or it doesn't get incinerated, but it actually gets to become a new bottle. So I think that's an important story to tell to the politician, that actually their inhabitants, they will appreciate it, they will like it. Yes. And then, of course, for many countries still, they are very committed to their climate reduction targets and to really reach those targets and to reach a target set in the Paris Agreement. Circularity is going to play an important role. You will not be able to then achieve those targets without also reducing, reusing, and recycling. Yeah. And then the third element, if you talk about circularity, which also is very important for government, is that this is actually also linked to supply security. You have all these valuable resources in your waste bins, on your landfills, being burned. These resources, you can actually reuse or you can recycle them, which will reduce then your dependency on, for example, import of precious materials. And at the same time, circularity typically is a fairly local or regional industry. So also you are creating then employment in your country.
Yeah, I think
many good reasons for focusing on circularity.
Yeah, for our government officials, if you're listening. Yeah, I think there's a lot of effort expended in the United States to recycle. And then occasionally we will see newspaper articles or, there'll be insights that maybe only 10% of all the things that we are recycling are actually making their way to back into the circular economy, that they're being reused, that they're appropriately being disposed of. And it's disheartening. we're spending a lot of time sorting, and it feels like so onerous. It feels like such a job to do this, taking out the trash and sorting everything. And I know it's been, a history in Europe for such a long time. Even dividing your waste by different colored glass. I know in Germany, you have dark glass and green glass and clear glass, et cetera, and you divide all of them. But it's kind of saddening, when we hear that maybe only 10% of what we're recycling is actually making it to the proper places, maybe because we're not sorting it correctly, or we don't have the appropriate partners who are able to use what's being discarded in a way that would benefit all of us. What do you think about that? And are you finding similar statistics around the world?
I think it's linked to, when you're going to set this up, you need a whole system. So you can't only take one part. You can't just take, the sorting at home and the collection if you don't really then have recycling facilities that can take the product. So you need to develop this hand in hand. And I understand, for a consumer, it's very disheartening, as you say, if you do all the efforts at home and then it will just end in a landfill anyway. Because of course, then it doesn't add value. But what we know is that if you design this properly, you can have very high recycling. You will get high recycling rates. But then you need to have some things that you are separating at home. It needs to be collected. It needs to be sorted. You need to use advanced sorting to make sure that you sort it into the right qualities. And you need then to have recycling companies that can make it into new materials. And then you need the brands and the manufacturing companies to actually use that material into their product. So you need, to create this new circular value chain, and you need all of those steps in the chain to really make it happen. But regardless, just starting with the collection and make it visible how much materials there are will help, the rest of the value chain to see, okay, now we're collecting this kind of volume. There is now, space or I will have enough feedstock now to create a plant, for example, for sorting, and then after that, recycling.
What do you think is the most innovative reused material that you've seen out of all the different ways of the things that you've collected and sorted? What would surprise my listeners about what can be reused again?
I think, most materials, can be reused again or recycled, except kind of, organics. You can, everything from what we're wearing to what we eat from and drink from. And that's a bit, again, what we are trying to say, it's feasible. You need to put the systems up. You need to ensure it's profitable, because it's not always profitable, but it is feasible. Most materials can be recycled. And what we are then working on is what I talked about is really what we call closed loop recycling. That is our gold standard. That is our ultimate game, because you see a lot of fun and innovative recycling solutions where you take some plastic from the ocean and you create a necklace or you create a bracelet. And these are good initiatives to create awareness. But of course, our objective is that these bottles that are collected from the ocean, first of all, they should never get into the ocean. They should be collected up front and they should become a bottle again. And that should be the mindset that we have, is that we should create the loops so that we try to keep the materials in really a circular loop as long as possible.
I was watching some entrepreneurs who were former ball boys at tennis matches. They would be the ones running across the field. One of them became a musician and needed sound insulation. And so he cut old tennis balls and made them into sound insulators, because it's rubber and material, and cloth that winds up working. So now they have a whole business of just going to big tennis clubs, collecting all of them and making them into soundproofing tiles that apparently lots of different recording studios and so forth are using. I think we're hearing more and more of these stories of innovative approaches to reusing and recycling. But it's important that our manufacturers see the materials that they create as going back into their own manufacturing process.
Exactly.
If I hear
That's
you
what I'm trying to say, but it's closed loop, is that, because of course it's a great example with these tennis balls, but they stop there in a way. And of course, insulation lasts longer, which is good, because that will last for hopefully decades before it's waste. But when that building is teared down, it will go out of the cycle, unless you find a way to actually, then recycle those tennis balls.
Yeah, unfortunately, those tennis balls apparently only last 3 games. Sometimes not even
Yeah,
make
it's
it
great.
through a whole match, right? Because they don't bounce enough anymore
Yeah.
to be up to standard. So, yeah, well, this is fascinating. So, I've come to the time on our podcast now where I'm asking you these hot seat questions.
Ooh.
So, quick, easy, one word answers, or maybe a sentence if you want to explain a little bit more about your thoughts. But who are some of the Nordic innovators who have inspired you? I'm thinking about authors or other executives, artists, activists, environmentalists. Who comes to mind for you?
Oh, I have to say Tore and Petter Planke. So those are the ones that started up TOMRA. They were the ones that built with their own hands the first reverse vending machine. And they are still, very passionate people that comes to our office at every Christmas dinner, and they're so curious and engaged. And why do they inspire me? I think, first of all, they were very forward leaning on technology, daring to take risk. They were thinking big from day one. They actually went to the US the first year because they were thinking we should launch this in the US. And also they were focused on people from day one. So they wanted to have, a company where you do something meaningful for the environment, but also where people have fun, can develop and engage. And that's a lot of what we are trying to maintain in the TOMRA culture today. They're very inspiring people.
Beautiful. What about a book or an author who's inspired you in this process?
Yeah, so I love reading. So there are many books that have inspired me. But thinking on circular economy, the first book coming to my mind is a book by a Norwegian author called Roy Jacobsen. It's called Unseen. It's the first of a trilogy from following a girl living on a small island on the far north in Norway, and it starts around 100 years ago. And they live on this, remote, rough island. And he describes so well on how they are maintaining everything they have. When something gets broken, how they mend it, how they are reusing things. When waste comes up to the island, from the ocean, because there is always something, they see it like as a fantastic gift that they can use for something. So it's such a nice reminder of how we used to live, where there was no waste. Everything was a resource. And it's of course not that I think we should go back to how it was 100 years ago, because they had a rough life. But I think this mindset, we should go back to this mindset that there isn't, waste. Everything is a resource, and we should figure out how we can use it the best. And it's a very well written book, and it's translated to English. I would recommend everybody to read it.
I can't wait to read it. What do you think is the number one thing we should take away from Nordic innovators in sustainability? What should we as Americans be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think we have a lot to learn from each other. So I think what Americans have been good at, that we as Norwegian and Nordic companies should learn from, is really about this taking risk, daring to take calculated risk and think big. And I don't think always we are good at that in the Nordic region. I think then what could the Americans learn from us? I think first of all, sustainability can be a really good business. There is so much business opportunities within sustainability. So
Here.
really to see it not as something you have to do, but it's something you should do, because this is where you can create good, significant businesses. I think this with collaboration, because you can really gain a lot from collaborating across. So if you're really going to succeed here, so to be open-minded for then having collaborations, I think is also an important thing. And then I think it's the mindset of the Nordic, the importance of nature, the transparency of what we're doing, and how that also actually can create trust, and through trust and the collaboration, and through the collaboration then the new solutions.
Yes. So well said, right? Because there's a lot of mistrust around these topics, that being able to transparently show how this is really changing lives and changing environments, changing whole ecosystems, commercially and in nature, that we have to be able to show that. Where do you think we should be focusing our attention when it comes to climate over the next 5 years?
So of course, I think circularity.
Sure.
So I'm coming from that, but also I mean it. There's been a lot of focus, on the energy transition, which is extremely important. And I don't think it's been enough focus on the resource transformation that needs to happen. So to meet the targets set in the Paris Agreement, energy will not solve everything. We need to really utilize our resources in a completely different way. And of course, the added benefit of that is not only contributing to the climate, but it is contributing then also to pollution. Plastic in ocean, huge issue that needs to stop. Littering in general. And also, as I mentioned earlier, that also, focusing on circularity has this added benefit on supply security. And in the more polarized world that we are in now, we can't afford putting these precious materials in a landfill or burn it. We need to ensure that they are being used again. So I believe, circularity is extremely important to meet the climate target, but also an added benefit. And one of the things that we are working on in TOMRA that I'm quite excited about, where we will launch the first version end of this year, it's a climate circularity protocol. So it's based on the greenhouse gas protocol, but we're working together with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development to then define and develop a protocol so that companies can, because we have talked about circularity now, and it is a complex topic, and it's so many different, you can do there's so many different materials, there's so many different solutions. How are the companies going to navigate on, what is actually their circularity score today, what should it be in the future, and how should they get there? So having a common standard on circularity reporting, so that companies can set targets, they can get guides on how to achieve those targets, and they can monitor progress. So that will create the right focus on the organization, but also the right transparency to also ensure then that we don't have the greenwashing happening, but actually that we also have true transparency also on circularity. So the plan is to launch that at the COP now in Brazil in November, the first version of it. And we believe it's going to be a very important tool for different businesses to then drive the circularity agenda.
So important. So important. Well, best of luck with that initiative. It sounds amazing.
Thank you.
I hope the UN takes up some of the work that you're doing as well and really begins to shine a spotlight on the amazing work that you're doing. Tove Andersen, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. If people want to get in touch with you and with TOMRA, how should they do that?
It's very easy. So they can do that by email to me directly, tove.andersen@tomra.com.
Fantastic. TOMRA, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you.